I never thought Christmas dinner would end with my arm broken and my family watching me bleed on their front steps. But that's exactly what happened when I walked into my childhood home, carrying homemade gifts I'd spent weeks crafting. The house felt colder than the December wind despite the twinkling lights and garland. My mother Patricia immediately started criticizing my thrift store dress, while my sister Diana rolled her eyes at my presence. My stepfather Robert didn't even look up from his phone. When I tried sharing my exciting news about finally landing my first teaching position after months of unemployment, Patricia's face twisted with disgust. She screamed the words that shattered my world forever. "You're still a burden at 26. Get out of my house, you useless failure." Diana's hands slammed into my shoulders before I could process what was happening. The force sent me stumbling backward through the doorway, my feet losing traction on the icy concrete steps. Time seemed to slow as I felt myself falling, my right arm instinctively reaching out to break the impact. The sickening crack that echoed through the winter air was my radius bone, snapping against the unforgiving pavement. Pain shot through my entire body like lightning, but the emotional agony cut deeper than any physical injury. I lay there on the frozen sidewalk, my breath forming small clouds in the bitter air, waiting for someone to help me up. Through the living room window, I could see my family standing in warm yellow light, watching me writhe on the ground. Patricia had her arms crossed. Diana was already turning away, and Robert continued scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. "Help me!" I whispered then, louder, "Please somebody help me." My voice carried down the quiet suburban street, but the three people who shared my blood remained motionless behind the glass. Mrs. Henderson from next door appeared, first her elderly face, etched with concern, as she knelt beside me in her Christmas apron. "Oh, honey, don't move. I'm calling 911 right now." Her weathered hands were gentle as she placed her coat over my shivering body. The ambulance ride felt like an eternity. Every bump in the road sent fresh waves of agony through my shattered arm, but nothing compared to the emotional devastation blooming in my chest. The paramedic, a kind woman named Lisa, kept asking about my emergency contacts. I stared at my phone screen, scrolling through a contact list that suddenly felt meaningless. "Family members who should be notified," she pressed gently. I looked back toward the house, now just a distant glow in the darkness. "I don't think I have any," I heard myself say. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez explained that my fracture was severe and would require surgical intervention. "The radius is completely displaced. We'll need to insert a metal plate to ensure proper healing." His professional compassion felt foreign after the cruelty I just experienced. As they wheeled me into pre-surgery preparation, I caught glimpses of other emergency room bays, filled with families clustered around their loved ones. A teenage boy with a sprained ankle had what looked like his entire extended family surrounding his bed, everyone talking over each other with worry and affection. An elderly woman getting stitches held her daughter's hand while her grandchildren drew pictures to cheer her up. My bay remained empty except for the medical staff. The surgery lasted 3 hours. When I woke up in recovery, my arm was encased in a cast that stretched from my wrist to my elbow. The nurse checking my vitals was an older woman named Grace, whose salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical bun. "Feeling any pain, sweetheart?" she asked, adjusting my IV drip. "Everywhere," I admitted, though I wasn't just talking about my arm. Grace pulled a chair closer to my bed. I heard what happened from the paramedics. "That's not right, honey. No family should leave someone hurt and alone." Her kindness broke something open inside me. Tears I'd been holding back since the moment Diana pushed me began flowing freely. "It's Christmas," I sobbed. "I just wanted to spend Christmas with them." "I know, baby. I know." Grace handed me tissues and sat quietly while I cried. "I've got 4 kids of my own, and I can't imagine treating anyone the way you were treated tonight. That's on them, not you." As the night wore on, Grace shared her own lunch with me since I'd missed dinner entirely. She told me about her children and grandchildren showing me pictures on her phone of their Christmas celebration earlier that day. Family isn't always about blood, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes the people who truly love you are the ones who choose to be in your life. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest, thinking maybe Patricia or Diana had come to their senses. Instead, it was from my Aunt Carolyn, Patricia's sister, who lived 2 states away. "Merry Christmas, Michelle Hope. You had a wonderful dinner with your mom and Diana. Send pictures." I stared at the message, realizing that Patricia had probably told everyone I simply hadn't shown up. The narrative was already being written, and I was the villain in their version of events. But as I lay there in that sterile hospital room, listening to the gentle hum of machines and the distant sounds of life continuing around me, something shifted inside my chest. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I wasn't walking on eggshells around Patricia's volatile moods. I wasn't anticipating Diana's cutting remarks or trying to earn Robert's acknowledgement. I was just existing, healing, and beginning to understand that the problem had never been me. The metal plate in my arm would be permanent, Dr. Martinez had explained. Every day for the rest of my life, I would carry a physical reminder of this moment. But as Christmas night faded into dawn, I realized I was also carrying something else, the first real clarity I'd had about my family in 26 years. Aunt Carolyn's guest bedroom felt like a sanctuary compared to the sterile hospital room I'd left behind. She'd driven 8 hours through the night after I called her from my discharge bed, arriving with homemade soup and a fury in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "Patricia told me you decided not to come for Christmas," Carolyn said, carefully arranging pillows to support my casted arm. "She said you'd gotten too busy with your new job and couldn't be bothered with family traditions anymore." The lie sat heavy between us. I explained what really happened, watching Carolyn's expression shift from disbelief to disgust to something that looked like recognition. "I should have known," she muttered, settling into the armchair beside the bed. "Michelle, there are things about your mother that I've kept quiet for too long, things I thought weren't my place to share." Over the next several days, as my arm throbbed and my body slowly healed, Carolyn unveiled a family history I'd never known existed. She showed me documents she'd saved in her attic, copies of my father's will bank statements, insurance papers that painted a picture of systematic deception. "Your daddy left you a college fund worth $80,000, Carolyn explained, spreading the papers across her kitchen table. "Patricia was supposed to manage it until you turned 18, then transfer it to your name. She told you it was gone after his medical bills, didn't she?" I nodded, remembering how Patricia had cried over those hospital invoices, claiming they'd wiped out every penny my father had saved for my future. I'd felt guilty for even asking about college funding after that conversation. "Medical insurance covered most of those expenses," Carolyn continued. "I know because I helped Patricia file the claims. That money should have been yours 6 years ago." The documentation told a story of careful manipulation. Bank transfers showed regular withdrawals from my inheritance fund, coinciding perfectly with Diana's expensive milestones, private school tuition, a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday sorority fees, and multiple failed business ventures that Patricia had bankrolled without my knowledge. "Diana's boutique downtown," Carolyn said grimly. "That came from your money. The lease, the inventory, even her salary for the first 2 years." While I processed this financial betrayal, Carolyn revealed even deeper deceptions. She pulled up social media posts on her tablet showing me conversations Diana had been having with our former high school classmates. Screenshots of group chats where Diana described me as mentally unstable and claimed I'd been making threats against the family. "Look at this one." Carolyn pointed to a message dated just 3 months earlier. Diana had written, "Michelle is getting scary. Mom and I are worried she might hurt herself or someone else. We're trying to get her help, but she refuses treatment." I stared at the lies, feeling physically sick. People I'd grown up with, friends I'd hoped to reconnect with someday, had been told I was dangerous and delusional. Diana had poisoned every relationship I might have had outside the family, ensuring my isolation was complete. During my second week at Carolyn's house, I started physical therapy for my arm. The rehabilitation center was a bright, modern facility where patients worked through their recoveries with determination and mutual support. My therapist was a man named Marcus, probably in his early 30s, with gentle hands and an easy smile that made even the painful exercises bearable. "How's the range of motion feeling today?" he asked during our third session, guiding my arm through careful stretches. "Better, I think. Still hurts, but better." I winced as he moved my wrist in small circles. Marcus paused, studying my face. "You know, I've been doing this for 7 years, and I can usually tell the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. You're carrying both, aren't you?" His perceptiveness caught me off guard. Most people saw my cast and assumed they understood my situation. "Family stuff," I said simply. "Family can be the hardest injuries to heal," he replied thoughtfully. "I know something about that." Over the following sessions, Marcus shared pieces of his own story. His parents had disowned him when he'd chosen physical therapy over the law career they'd planned for him. His sister had stolen money from their grandmother's estate and blamed him when the theft was discovered. "I spent years trying to prove I was worthy of their love," he admitted. "Took me too long to realize that real love doesn't require proof." His words resonated with something deep inside my chest. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn Patricia's approval, accepting blame for every family conflict, apologizing for existing. Marcus helped me see these patterns, not as personal failures, but as symptoms of a toxic dynamic I'd never chosen. "Have you considered legal action?" he asked during our fourth week of sessions. "What they did with your inheritance, that's not just morally wrong, it's theft." The idea terrified me. Taking legal action against Patricia felt like the ultimate betrayal even after everything she'd done. But as I lay awake that night in Carolyn's guest room, I realized I was still thinking like a victim instead of a survivor. The next morning, I found Carolyn in her garden tending to her winter roses, despite the January cold. "I want to talk to a lawyer," I said without preamble. She looked up from her pruning, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. "It's about time. I know just the person." That afternoon, Carolyn drove me to the law offices of Jennifer Walsh, a family attorney who specialized in financial abuse cases. Jennifer was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and a direct manner that put me immediately at ease. "From what Carolyn described over the phone, you have a strong case," Jennifer said after reviewing the documents. "Fraudulent management of an inheritance, forged signatures, misrepresentation. The fact that your aunt kept copies of everything is going to save us months of investigation." As Jennifer outlined the legal process, something shifted inside me. For the first time since Christmas night, I felt like I had some control over what happened next. I wasn't just a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was someone who could fight back. But the biggest shock was still coming. During our second meeting with Jennifer, she pulled up public records related to Diana's boutique. What she found made my blood run cold. "Your sister's business has been reporting losses for 2 years," Jennifer explained, scrolling through financial filings on her laptop. "But here's what's interesting. The business account shows regular cash deposits that don't match the reported sales." She turned the screen toward me. "These deposits coincide with withdrawals from your inheritance fund, but they're larger amounts than what was taken from your account. Someone else is putting money into this business, and they're using it to wash funds that probably shouldn't be traced." The room felt like it was spinning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your family's financial crimes might go deeper than just stealing your inheritance. I think we need to contact federal authorities." As I drove back to Carolyn's house that evening, my casted arm aching with the approaching winter storm, I realized that being pushed down those steps had actually saved me from something much worse. If I'd stayed in that family, stayed silent and compliant, I might have become an unwitting accomplice to whatever Patricia and Diana were really doing. The broken bone in my arm would heal in 6 to 8 weeks. But the broken trust, the shattered illusions about family loyalty, those were going to take much longer to mend. For the first time, though, I felt ready to begin that harder healing process. The federal investigation began with a knock on Carolyn's door at 7 in the morning. Agent Rebecca Torres showed her badge and explained that financial irregularities connected to Diana's boutique had triggered a broader inquiry into organized money laundering in our area. We understand Michelle Parker has been cooperating with local attorneys regarding inheritance fraud. Agent Torres said, settling into Carolyn's living room with a cup of coffee. We'd like to expand that cooperation if she's willing. Sitting there in my pajamas with my arm still in its cast, I felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. 3 weeks ago, I'd been an unemployed teacher, hoping for a peaceful Christmas dinner. Now, federal agents were asking for my help to uncover financial crimes I never knew existed. "What exactly are you investigating?" I asked. Agent Torres opened a thick folder. "Your stepfather, Robert, has gambling debts with some very dangerous people. We believe your mother and sister's business has been used to clean money that Robert borrowed from loan sharks. The boutique shows profits it's never actually made, and those fake profits are being used to pay off his creditors." The picture she painted was worse than anything I'd imagined. Patricia hadn't just stolen my inheritance to spoil Diana. She'd been using it to keep Robert from getting his legs broken by people who collected debts with violence. "We need someone who understands the family dynamics," Agent Torres continued. "Someone who can help us understand how the money moved and who knew what when." I agreed to cooperate fully, partly out of civic duty, but mostly because I realized this investigation would give me something I'd never had before: complete independence from Patricia's control. If she was facing federal charges, she couldn't manipulate me with guilt or family obligations anymore. During this same period, my physical therapy sessions with Marcus became the bright spot in each week. As my arm gradually regained strength and mobility, I found myself opening up to him about more than just family trauma. He was intelligent and funny, with a genuine interest in my teaching career that no one else had ever shown. "What grade levels do you want to work with?" he asked during a particularly challenging session where I was trying to regain fine motor control in my fingers. "High school," I said, concentrating on picking up small objects with my healing hand. "Kids who are struggling may be thinking about dropping out. I want to be the teacher who helps them see that their lives can be different from whatever chaos they're living in at home." Marcus paused in his documentation. "That's incredibly specific. Any particular reason?" I told him about my own high school experience, how I'd almost quit school junior year because Patricia constantly told me I was wasting time and money on education. A guidance counselor named Mrs. Peterson had talked me into staying, helping me apply for scholarships and encouraging me to pursue teaching. "She probably saved my life," I admitted. "I want to do that for other kids." "You will," Marcus said with such conviction that I actually believed him. 3 weeks later, that prediction came true. The principal at Jefferson High School called to offer me a position teaching English to at-risk students in their alternative education program. The job came with challenges, but also with the chance to work with teenagers who reminded me of myself, kids from broken homes who'd been told they weren't worth investing in. My first day was terrifying and exhilarating. My class was small, only 12 students, but their stories were heartbreaking. There was Jake, a 17-year-old whose mother drank herself unconscious most nights, leaving him to care for his 2 younger siblings. There was Samantha, brilliant but defiant, whose foster parents were more interested in the monthly check than her well-being. There was David, who'd been kicked out of his house for being gay and was sleeping in his car. These kids saw through pretense immediately. They could spot fake sympathy or condescending pity from across the room, but they also recognized authenticity when they encountered it. "Why do you actually want to teach us?" Jake asked bluntly during my second week. "Most teachers just want us to sit down and shut up until we age out." "Because I know what it's like to have a family that treats you like you're worthless," I answered honestly. "And I know how much it matters when one adult tells you that's not true." The room went quiet. These kids had probably never heard a teacher admit to having problems at home. My family disowned me at Christmas. I continued rolling up my sleeve to show them my cast. They broke my arm and left me bleeding on their front steps. But you know what? That was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it finally showed me who they really were. After that conversation, my relationship with the students shifted completely. They started staying after class to talk about their problems, asking for help with college applications, trusting me with secrets they'd never shared with adults before. I realized I'd found my calling not despite my family trauma, but because of it. Meanwhile, my therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Chen were helping me understand the psychological patterns that had kept me trapped for so long. Dr. Chen was a specialist in family trauma who helped me recognize the difference between healthy family dynamics and the emotional abuse I'd normalized. Children from dysfunctional families often become hyper-responsible, she explained during one of our weekly sessions. They learn to manage other people's emotions to prevent conflict to sacrifice their own needs for family peace. It becomes a survival strategy that's hard to unlearn. She was right. I'd spent years walking on eggshells around Patricia's unpredictable moods, trying to anticipate what would set her off, accepting blame for problems I hadn't created. Breaking that pattern was harder than healing my broken bone. The breakthrough came during my 6th week of therapy. Dr. Chen had me write a letter to my younger self explaining what I wished someone had told me about family relationships. Dear Michelle, I wrote, being treated badly doesn't mean you're bad. Taking abuse doesn't make you strong. Protecting yourself isn't selfish. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions or require you to shrink yourself into something smaller. Reading those words out loud in therapy, I started crying. Not the desperate, hopeless tears I'd shed in the hospital, but tears of recognition and relief. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely proud of myself for making hard but necessary choices. The universe seemed to be rewarding this newfound self-respect. My relationship with Marcus deepened from friendship to something more meaningful as we spent time together outside physical therapy. He understood my healing process without trying to rush it, offering support without trying to rescue me. But the most satisfying development was watching my students thrive. Jake's grades improved dramatically once he realized I wouldn't give up on him. Samantha started writing poetry that took my breath away. David found the courage to apply for college scholarships, specifically for LGBTQ students from difficult backgrounds. You saved my life, Jake told me one afternoon as we worked on his college application essay. I was going to drop out and just work construction like my dad, but you made me believe I could do more. His words reminded me of what Mrs. Peterson had done for me years ago. The cycle of healing was continuing, spreading outward from my own recovery to touch other lives that desperately needed hope. That evening, as I sat in my small apartment reviewing lesson plans, my phone rang. For a split second, seeing unknown number on the screen, I wondered if it might be Patricia or Diana trying to reach me. But I'd changed my number weeks ago and given the new one only to people I trusted. It was Agent Torres with an update on the federal investigation. We've gathered enough evidence to move forward with charges, she said. Your cooperation has been invaluable, Michelle. We're going to need you to testify when this goes to trial. What kind of charges? I asked. Money laundering, tax evasion, fraud. Your mother is looking at significant prison time. Your sister will probably plea bargain for probation, but her business is finished. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment trying to process what justice actually felt like. It wasn't the explosive satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, it was quieter, more profound, the deep peace that comes from knowing truth has finally been told and consequences are finally being faced. My cast would come off in 2 more weeks. My arm would be forever changed by the metal plate, but it would also be stronger than before, just like the rest of me. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a series of revelations that turned my family's world completely upside down. Agent Torres called on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing essays from my students, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a particularly complex puzzle. Michelle, we've uncovered something bigger than we initially thought, she began. Your stepfather, Robert, has been in debt to a loan shark operation that spans 3 states. We're talking about organized crime, not just local gambling problems. She explained that the federal investigation had led them to a network of illegal gambling operations, drug money laundering, and loan sharking that had been operating out of seemingly legitimate small businesses across the region. Diana's boutique was just one of several fronts being used to clean dirty money. The amount of cash flowing through your sister's business account is staggering, Agent Torres continued. She's been reporting annual profits of $30,000 to the IRS while actually processing closer to $400,000 in transactions. That's not just tax evasion anymore. That's organized criminal activity. The scope of what my family had been involved in made my head spin. Patricia hadn't just stolen my inheritance for Diana's benefit. She'd been using it as seed money to help Robert pay off debts that could have gotten him killed. In some twisted way, she'd probably convinced herself she was protecting the family. But the most shocking revelation was still coming. Robert gave up your mother and sister in exchange for a reduced sentence, Agent Torres explained. He's been cooperating with us for 3 weeks now, providing detailed records of every transaction, every fake invoice, every dollar that moved through their system. The man who'd ignored me for years, who'd treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own childhood home, had been secretly documenting every crime Patricia and Diana committed. He'd been building a case against them from the inside, probably planning to use it as an insurance policy if things went wrong. We raided your mother's house yesterday morning, Agent Torres continued. We found evidence of tax fraud going back 7 years, detailed records of money laundering operations, and documentation showing your sister was fully aware of the illegal nature of her business from the beginning. That same afternoon, my phone rang with a call that made my heart race. It was Diana calling from a number I didn't recognize. Michelle. Her voice was shaky, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. We need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. For years, Diana had spoken to me with condescension, as if I were a child who couldn't understand adult matters. Now she was speaking to me like I held her life in my hands. The federal agents, they're saying things about Mom and me that aren't true. She continued rapidly. They're claiming we knew about Robert's gambling, but we didn't know anything. We were trying to run a legitimate business. I let her talk, listening to the panic in her voice as she spun increasingly desperate lies. She claimed Robert had forged their signatures on documents. She insisted they'd been victims of his manipulation. She even suggested that I had somehow orchestrated the entire investigation out of spite. You know, Mom and I love you, Diana said, her voice breaking. We've always been a close family. This Christmas thing was just a misunderstanding. Mom's been heartbroken since you left. The audacity of rewriting history while federal agents were literally seizing evidence of their crimes was breathtaking. But something else struck me as Diana talked. She genuinely seemed to believe her own lies. Years of justifying increasingly illegal behavior had left her unable to distinguish between truth and convenient fiction. Diana. I interrupted her rambling excuses. Did you know about my inheritance money? Silence stretched across the phone line. What inheritance money? She finally asked, but the hesitation had already given her away. The $80,000 Dad left from my college education, the money Patricia used to fund your business. I don't know what you're talking about, Diana said, but her voice had gone flat mechanical. Agent Torres showed me bank records, Diana. Every withdrawal from my account corresponds to a deposit in your business account. You've known about this money for years. Another long pause. Then Diana's voice returned with a hardness I recognized from childhood arguments. You never deserved that money anyway, she said. You've never contributed anything to this family. At least I was trying to build something productive with it. There it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind layers of justification and fake victimhood. She'd known exactly where the money came from, and she'd convinced herself she had more right to it than I did. The boutique is failing, isn't it? I asked. It's just a rough patch, Diana insisted. All small businesses go through difficult periods. If you really cared about family, you'd help us, instead of cooperating with these federal agents who are trying to destroy us. After I hung up, I sat in my classroom for a long time watching the afternoon sun stream through the windows where my students' artwork was displayed. These kids had taught me what real family looked like, people who supported each other without expecting anything in return, who celebrated each other's successes instead of competing for resources, who told the truth even when it was difficult. That evening, Marcus took me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. We'd been dating for 2 months now, and his steady presence had become an anchor during the chaos of the investigation. "How are you handling all this?" he asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Better than I thought I would," I answered honestly. There's something liberating about watching people face consequences for their actions instead of watching them escape responsibility again. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "My sister still sends me texts, sometimes trying to get me to take blame for the money she stole from our grandmother. She can't understand why I won't help her fix the problems she created. Do you ever feel guilty about it?" "I used to," he admitted. But Dr. Chen helped me understand that protecting yourself from toxic people isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. I squeezed his hand, grateful for someone who understood the complexity of loving people who'd hurt you while still maintaining healthy boundaries. The next week brought another unexpected development. Mrs. Anderson, the principal at Jefferson High School, called me into her office with news that would change my career trajectory. "Michelle, I've been watching your work with our alternative education students," she began. "The transformation in those kids since you started teaching them has been remarkable. I want to offer you the position of Alternative Education Program Coordinator." The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, administrative responsibilities, and the chance to develop curricula for at-risk students across the entire district. It was an opportunity I never could have imagined 6 months ago when I was unemployed and living on Carolyn's couch. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Anderson added. "The school board has approved funding for a mentorship program you proposed. We want you to design and implement it starting next fall." Walking out of her office that afternoon, I realized that every door Patricia had tried to close for me had actually opened something better. Her constant criticism of my teaching aspirations had made me more determined to succeed. Her financial manipulation had led to legal action that was freeing me from her control forever. Even her cruelty at Christmas had ultimately saved me from becoming complicit in criminal activity. But the most satisfying irony was still ahead of me. As I drove home that evening, Agent Torres called with one final update that would complete my family's downfall. "Michelle, we arrested your mother this morning," she said. "She's being held without bail pending trial. The evidence against her is overwhelming and her attorney is already discussing plea bargain options." "What about Diana?" "Your sister is cooperating now, providing additional evidence against your mother in exchange for reduced charges. It seems family loyalty has its limits when federal prison time is involved." That night I called Carolyn to share the news. She listened quietly as I described the arrests, the evidence, the complete collapse of the criminal operation my family had been running. "Are you all right, honey?" she asked when I finished. "I am," I said, surprised to realize it was completely true. For the first time in my life, I actually am. The broken arm that had started this whole journey was fully healed now. The metal plate would always be there, but it had made the bone stronger than it was before, just like everything else about my new life. The federal trial began on a humid Tuesday morning in late May. I sat in the witness waiting area wearing the navy blue dress suit Marcus had helped me choose, trying to calm my nerves before testifying against the woman who'd raised me. Through the small window in the door, I could see Patricia sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her usually perfect hair hanging limp around her shoulders. She looked smaller, somehow diminished in a way I'd never seen before. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy that had kept me trapped for so many years. Then I remembered Christmas night lying broken on icy concrete while she watched from her warm living room, and the sympathy evaporated. Michelle Parker. The bailiff called, and I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. The prosecutor assistant U.S. Attorney David Kim guided me through my testimony with gentle professionalism. I explained the inheritance theft, the years of emotional manipulation, the lies Patricia had told about my mental health to isolate me from potential support systems. "Miss Parker," he asked, "in your opinion, was your mother aware that her actions were harming you financially?" "Completely aware," I answered, looking directly at the jury. She knew exactly how much money my father had left for my education, and she chose to use it for illegal activities instead. During cross-examination, Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge. He suggested that my cooperation with federal agents was motivated by spite rather than justice. "Isn't it true, Miss Parker, that you were angry about being asked to leave your family's Christmas dinner?" he asked. "I wasn't asked to leave," I corrected him calmly. "I was physically assaulted and thrown down a flight of concrete steps, resulting in a broken bone that required surgery. And you blame your family for that accident." "I blame my family for pushing me down those steps and then watching me lie injured on the ground without offering help. Yes." The attorney tried several more approaches, but my months of therapy with Dr. Chen had prepared me for exactly these kinds of manipulative tactics. I answered every question truthfully and directly without the defensive reactions they were hoping to provoke. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I caught Patricia's eye for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her expression held a mixture of rage and disbelief, as if she couldn't understand how the daughter she'd trained to be submissive had found the strength to fight back. Outside the courthouse, Agent Torres congratulated me on my testimony. "You did great in there," she said. "Clear, consistent, unshakable. That's exactly what we needed." "How strong is the case?" I asked. "Overwhelming. Your mother's financial records tell the whole story, and Robert's cooperation has given us evidence of criminal intent going back years. She's looking at 5 to 7 years in federal prison." That evening, I returned to my apartment to find an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written on the front in Diana's handwriting, but there was no return address. Inside was a 3-page letter that began with an apology and quickly devolved into blame and manipulation. "Michelle," it read, "I know you probably hate me right now, but I need you to understand that I never wanted any of this to happen. Mom convinced me that using your inheritance money was temporary just until my business got established. I always planned to pay you back with interest once I was profitable." The lies continued for 2 more pages. Diana claimed she'd been a victim of Patricia's manipulation just like me. She insisted that Robert had threatened both her and Patricia if they didn't cooperate with his money laundering scheme. She even suggested that turning state's evidence against Patricia had been her way of protecting the family from worse consequences. But the final paragraph revealed her real motivation for writing. "The boutique is going to be seized by federal agents next week. Everything I've worked for is going to be destroyed. I know you have money now from the inheritance settlement. If you could just loan me $50,000, I could relocate the business and start over somewhere else. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I'm profitable again. Please, Michelle. You're the only family I have left." I read the letter twice, then calmly fed it into my paper shredder. The next few weeks brought a series of satisfying conclusions to various aspects of my old life. Diana's boutique was indeed seized by federal agents who found additional evidence of money laundering hidden in boxes of designer handbags. Robert pleaded guilty to multiple felonies and received 3 years in federal prison. Diana accepted a plea bargain that would give her 2 years probation in exchange for complete financial restitution to her victims. During this same period, my new life was flourishing beyond anything I could have imagined. My promotion to Alternative Education Program Coordinator had given me the resources to implement innovative teaching strategies that were getting attention from educators across the state. The mentorship program I designed was being studied as a model for other districts dealing with at-risk student populations. But the most meaningful development was happening in my personal relationships. Marcus and I had grown closer through the stress of the trial and the excitement of my career advancement. He'd been my rock during difficult testimony, my celebration partner when good things happened, and my gentle voice of reason when I struggled with conflicting emotions about my family's downfall. One evening in June, as we walked through the downtown park where we'd had our first unofficial date, he stopped beside the fountain where couples often got engaged. "Michelle," he said, taking my hands in his, "I know this has been an incredible year of change for you. I don't want to add pressure to everything else you're processing." My heart started racing as he reached into his jacket pocket. "But I also can't imagine my life without you in it," he continued. "You've shown me what real strength looks like, what genuine kindness feels like, what it means to build something beautiful from broken pieces." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, I said yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized that the hand he was holding still bore faint scars from the night I'd fallen on Patricia's steps. Those scars had become part of a story about survival and transformation, rather than just pain and betrayal. We set the date for the following spring, wanting to give ourselves time to plan properly and to allow the trial aftermath to fully settle. But even planning a wedding revealed how completely my life had changed. My guest list was filled with chosen family, Carolyn, my students, and teaching colleagues, Dr. Chen Agent Torres, and the friends I'd made through my recovery process. Patricia's guest list, if she'd been planning a wedding, would have been filled with people impressed by superficial status and willing to overlook criminal behavior for social advantage. The difference felt like a perfect metaphor for the choice I'd made to walk away from toxicity and toward authenticity. In late July, exactly 7 months after the Christmas dinner that had changed everything, Patricia was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, having said everything I needed to say during the trial. But I did visit Carolyn that weekend, bringing Marcus with me to meet the aunt who'd quite literally saved my life by offering shelter when I had nowhere else to go. "I'm proud of you," Carolyn said as we sat on her back porch watching the summer sunset. "Your father would be proud too. He always believed you were stronger than Patricia gave you credit for." "Do you think I did the right thing?" I asked. "Testifying against her, I mean." Carolyn was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "Honey, there's a difference between family loyalty and enabling criminal behavior. Patricia made her choices long before you ever stepped foot in that courtroom. You didn't put her in prison. Her own actions did." As we drove home that evening, Marcus asked me if I felt closure about my family situation. "Not closure exactly," I said, watching familiar highways pass by in the gathering darkness, "but clarity. I understand now that loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse from them, and protecting yourself doesn't make you the villain, even if they try to paint you that way." The upcoming school year was going to bring new challenges and opportunities. I'd been invited to speak at education conferences about alternative approaches to teaching at-risk students. The mentorship program had received additional funding that would allow us to expand into middle schools. Marcus and I were looking at houses together, talking about building a life that would be stable and nurturing in all the ways my childhood home never was. But most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment about people and relationships. The little voice inside me that had always known something was wrong with my family's dynamics had finally been heard and validated. Patricia had taught me through her terrible example exactly what kind of mother I never wanted to become. Diana had shown me the difference between genuine sisterhood and competitive manipulation. Robert had demonstrated how weakness and cowardice could masquerade as quiet strength. They'd given me a perfect blueprint for the kind of family I wanted to build with Marcus, one based on mutual respect, honest communication, and unconditional support that didn't require anyone to shrink themselves to make others comfortable. The metal plate in my arm would always remind me of where I'd come from, but the ring on my finger pointed toward where I was going, and for the first time in my life, that destination looked bright with possibility. September brought the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the campus of Jefferson High School in brilliant shades of gold and crimson as I prepared for my second year as Alternative Education Program Coordinator. My students from the previous year had returned with confidence I barely recognized their success stories, spreading hope throughout the program. Jake had been accepted to community college with a partial scholarship and was working part-time at a local garage to pay for his remaining expenses. Samantha had won a statewide poetry competition and was being recruited by several universities. David had been selected for a full-ride scholarship to study social work planning to become an advocate for LGBTQ youth from difficult backgrounds. "You changed my whole life trajectory," Jake told me during a visit to update me on his college progress. "I went from planning to drop out to planning a future I actually want." These success stories filled me with a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. Every day brought proof that breaking cycles of dysfunction was possible, that young people could rewrite their stories with the right support and encouragement. My personal life was equally fulfilling. Marcus and I had found a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood close to both our jobs. The house needed some renovation work, but we were enjoying the process of making decisions together, choosing paint colors and furniture that reflected our shared vision of what a home should feel like. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that building this life with Marcus was part of my healing process. "You're learning what healthy relationships actually look like," she'd explained. "Trust mutual respect, genuine care for each other's well-being. It's the opposite of everything you grew up thinking was normal." The wedding planning was progressing smoothly with Carolyn helping me navigate traditions I wanted to keep versus ones that held no meaning for my new life. We decided on a small ceremony in the school garden, surrounded by the people who'd chosen to be part of my journey rather than the people who'd happened to share my DNA. But on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late October, the phone call came that would test everything I'd learned about maintaining boundaries. I was grading papers in my office when an unknown number appeared on my phone screen. For a split second, I considered not answering, but something made me pick up. Michelle. The voice was Patricia's, but it sounded nothing like the strong, commanding tone I'd known my entire life. She sounded tired, broken, desperate. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my heart rate immediately accelerating. "Carolyn gave it to me. Michelle, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. It's about Diana." I almost ended the call right then. The last thing I wanted was to be drawn back into family drama when my life was finally peaceful and healthy. But something in Patricia's voice stopped me. "What about Diana?" "She's in trouble. Real trouble. The boutique bankruptcy wiped out everything she had. She's been living in her car for 3 weeks. The stress has triggered some kind of mental breakdown, and she's been making threats about hurting herself." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of family obligation that had controlled me for so many years. The old Michelle would have immediately asked what I could do to help, but therapy had taught me to recognize manipulation even when it was wrapped in genuine crisis. "Patricia, you're calling me from federal prison. You've been convicted of multiple felonies. Diana made her own choices to participate in illegal activities. I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of those choices." "I know we hurt you," Patricia said, her voice cracking. "I know what we did at Christmas was wrong, but Diana is going to kill herself if someone doesn't help her. You're the only one who can save her." There it was. The ultimate manipulation. Make me responsible for Diana's life while taking no accountability for the choices that had led to this crisis. "Have you encouraged Diana to seek professional mental health treatment?" I asked. "She won't listen to me, but you were always the one she looked up to, even if she didn't show it. She'd listen to you." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Diana had never looked up to me. She'd spent years putting me down, calling me worthless, participating in my emotional abuse. Now Patricia was rewriting history to make me feel obligated to save the person who'd literally pushed me down those steps. "Michelle, I'm begging you," Patricia continued. "Use some of that inheritance money to help her get back on her feet. just enough to get her into an apartment and maybe restart the business somewhere else. She's learned her lesson about the financial stuff. She just needs one more chance. And there it was. The real reason for the call. Not Diana's mental health, but another attempt to access my money. The inheritance they'd stolen, the legal settlement they'd been forced to pay, the insurance money from my father they'd never thought I'd discover. It was all mine now, and they wanted it back. "Patricia," I said calmly, "Diana broke my arm and left me bleeding on your front steps. You watched it happen without offering help. You stole my inheritance for years and lied about it. Diana participated in money laundering operations that could have destroyed my teaching career if I'd been implicated. Neither of you has ever apologized for any of this." "We're apologizing now," Patricia said quickly. "We're sorry, we made mistakes. But family is supposed to forgive family, Michelle. It's supposed to mean something." "You're right," I agreed. "Family is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to mean unconditional love, mutual support, celebrating each other's successes, being there during difficult times. You've never offered me any of those things." "But we're offering now," Patricia insisted. "If you help Diana, we can all start over. We can be a real family." The promise of the family I'd always wanted was dangled in front of me like bait. For just a moment, I felt the old longing, the desperate hope that maybe this time would be different. Then I remembered Jake's face when he'd been accepted to college. I thought about Samantha reading her award-winning poetry at the state competition. I remembered David's tears of joy when his scholarship was announced. I thought about Marcus's steady love, Carolyn's unconditional support, Dr. Chen's wisdom, and all the students whose lives had been changed because I'd learned to break unhealthy patterns. That was real family. Those were the relationships that had nurtured my growth, celebrated my achievements, and supported me through difficulties without asking for anything in return. "Patricia," I said, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. "I don't have a sister." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "What do you mean?" she finally asked. "I mean, Diana chose to hurt me repeatedly. She chose to participate in criminal activities. She chose to steal money that belonged to me. She chose to isolate me from potential friends and support systems. Those aren't the choices a sister makes." "But blood family—" "Blood doesn't make family," I interrupted. "Love makes family. Respect makes family. Mutual care and support make family. I have a family now, and it's made up of people who chose to be in my life and who treat me with kindness." "So you're going to let your sister die?" The manipulation was so blatant it was almost funny. "I'm going to let Diana face the consequences of her own choices, just like I had to face the consequences of mine. The difference is that my choices led to healing growth and healthy relationships. Her choices led to criminal conviction and personal destruction." "Michelle, please." "Goodbye, Patricia. Don't call me again." I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my office for several minutes, waiting for guilt or doubt to set in. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in months. The final thread connecting me to that toxic family dynamic had been severed, and I was completely free. That evening, I told Marcus about the conversation. He listened without trying to influence my decision, offering support, regardless of what I chose to do. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Like I passed a final test," I answered honestly. "They offered me everything I used to think I wanted: acceptance, family, reconciliation, a chance to be the hero. But I realized I don't want those things anymore, not from them. I want what I already have, relationships built on genuine love instead of manipulation." Marcus pulled me closer on our couch, and I felt the solid reality of what we were building together. In 6 months, we'd be married. In a few years, we might have children of our own. Those children would grow up in a home where love wasn't conditional, where mistakes were learning opportunities instead of reasons for punishment, where every family member was valued for who they were rather than what they could provide. The cycle of dysfunction that had defined generations of my family would end with me. That was the greatest justice of all. Outside Outside our window, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. Winter was coming, but this year, I wouldn't spend Christmas hoping for acceptance from people who'd never truly loved me. I'd spend it building traditions with people who'd chosen to be my family, celebrating the miracle of second chances and the power of choosing healing over history. The metal plate in my arm would always remind me of where I'd come from, but the ring on my finger pointed toward where I was going, and that destination was filled with love I'd never have to earn, and acceptance I'd never have to prove I deserved. The first snowfall of December covered Jefferson High School in pristine white, transforming the campus into something magical. Standing in my classroom window, watching students hurry between buildings, with their breath forming little clouds in the crisp air, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for how completely my life had changed in just 1 year. My engagement ring caught the winter sunlight as I arranged student portfolios on my desk, each one representing a young person whose story had shifted from despair toward hope. The alternative education program had expanded to serve twice as many students as last year, with waiting lists at every grade level. The success rates were unprecedented. 90% of my students were on track to graduate, and 70% were planning to pursue higher education or skilled trade programs. "Miss Parker," came a voice from my doorway. Jake stood there in his community college sweatshirt, his face bright with the confidence that education had given him. "I wanted to stop by and give you this." He handed me a letter of acceptance to a 4-year university, along with notification of a full academic scholarship. "I got in," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to study engineering just like we talked about." Watching him walk away with his head held high, I realized this was what family actually looked like, celebrating each other's victories, investing in each other's dreams, showing up during difficult moments without keeping score of who owed what to whom. Marcus arrived at my classroom just as the afternoon bell rang, carrying coffee for both of us and wearing the smile that had become my favorite sight in the world. "Ready for our appointment?" he asked. We were meeting with the wedding coordinator to finalize details for our ceremony in 3 months. The guest list had grown to include former students, teaching colleagues, and the network of genuine friendships I'd built over the past year. Carolyn would walk me down the aisle, Agent Torres had agreed to do a reading, and Dr. Chen was officiating the ceremony after getting ordained online specifically for our wedding. As we drove through the snowy streets toward downtown, Marcus reached over to squeeze my hand. "Any word from your family since that call in October?" he asked gently. "Nothing," I replied, and realized I felt only relief about their continued absence from my life. Carolyn heard through mutual friends that Diana moved to another state and is working as a waitress somewhere. Patricia has 2 more years left on her sentence. "Do you ever wonder if you'll hear from them again?" "Probably," I admitted. "People like that don't usually give up permanently, but I'm not the same person they used to manipulate. Whatever they try next, I'll be ready for it." The meeting with our wedding coordinator went smoothly. We finalized the menu, confirmed the flower arrangements, and reviewed the timeline for our ceremony in the school garden, where I'd found my calling as an educator. Everything about the planning process felt joyful and collaborative, the opposite of the stress and drama that had defined every family gathering of my childhood. That evening, we attended the winter concert at Jefferson High School, where several of my former students were performing. Samantha read one of her poems, David played guitar with the school band, and Jake introduced the evening's program as student body vice president of the community college. "These kids have become your legacy," Marcus whispered as we applauded their performances. He was right. Every student who learned to believe in themselves, every young person who chose education over dropping out, every teenager who discovered they were worth investing in, they were all part of a growing network of people who understood that families could be chosen and that love was something you built through daily actions rather than something you inherited through genetics. After the concert, we drove to Carolyn's house for our monthly dinner together. She'd become not just my aunt, but my closest friend, the person who'd shown me what unconditional family support actually looked like. "I have something for you," she said after we'd finished eating, pulling out a wrapped package from her hall closet. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before, filled with pictures of my father and me from when I was very young. There were photos of him teaching me to ride a bicycle, helping me build a treehouse, reading bedtime stories. In every picture, his face showed pure love and pride as he looked at his daughter. "I saved these when Patricia was getting rid of your father's things," Carolyn explained. "I thought someday you might want to remember what real parental love looked like." Looking through those photographs, I could see qualities in my father's expression that I'd learned to recognize in Marcus, in my students' families, and Dr. Chen's therapeutic approach: genuine care, protective instincts, and investment in my well-being that asked for nothing in return. "He would be so proud of the woman you've become," Carolyn said softly. "He'd love Marcus, and he'd be amazed by your work with those students." As Christmas approached, Marcus and I established our own traditions. We volunteered at the local homeless shelter on Christmas Eve, serving dinner to families who were struggling through difficult circumstances. Many of the people we served reminded me of my own journey. Individuals who'd been abandoned by blood relatives but were working to build better lives for themselves. One woman, probably close to my age, was there with her 2 young children after leaving an abusive marriage. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she told me as I served her plate. "My family says it's my fault for marrying him in the first place." I quietly slipped her Dr. Chen's business card. "Family is wrong sometimes," I told her. "You deserve support, not blame." Later that evening at home in the house, Marcus and I were making our own. We exchanged simple gifts and talked about the year that had brought us together. I gave him a photo album documenting our relationship from my first physical therapy appointment through our engagement. He gave me a journal bound in leather, inscribed with the words, "For recording new family traditions." "I love that we get to create everything from scratch," I said, curled up beside him on our couch. "No toxic patterns to unlearn, no complicated histories to navigate. Just us building something beautiful." On Christmas morning, we woke up in each other's arms in a home filled with peace, instead of walking on eggshells, with love that felt safe and stable instead of conditional and volatile. The contrast to Christmas morning 1 year ago, lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm and a shattered heart, was almost impossible to believe. My phone rang around noon with a call from Agent Torres, who'd become a friend over the months of working together. "Merry Christmas, Michelle," she said warmly. "I wanted to let you know that Patricia was denied early release yesterday. The parole board felt she hadn't shown sufficient remorse for her crimes." "How do you feel about that?" I asked, realizing I wasn't sure of my own reaction. "Honestly, I think justice is being served. She needs more time to understand the impact of her choices." After hanging up, I shared the news with Marcus, who simply nodded and pulled me closer. "Her timeline isn't your responsibility," he reminded me. "Your only job is to keep building the life you want." That afternoon, we hosted a small gathering for our chosen family. Carolyn came over with homemade cookies. Dr. Chen brought her famous lasagna, and several colleagues from school dropped by with their families. The house filled with laughter, genuine conversation, and the kind of warmth that comes from people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Watching everyone interact, I realized this was what family gatherings were supposed to feel like: relaxed, supportive, celebrating each other without competition or hidden agendas. Children played safely, while adults had meaningful conversations. Conflicts were addressed directly and resolved with mutual respect. Everyone left feeling better than when they'd arrived. As spring arrived and our wedding date approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The physical scar on my arm had faded to a thin silver line, barely noticeable unless someone looked closely. The emotional scars had healed into wisdom about red flags, healthy boundaries, and the difference between love and manipulation. My work with at-risk students had evolved into a district-wide program that was being studied by educators across the country. I'd been invited to speak at conferences about breaking cycles of family dysfunction through educational intervention. The kids who'd been written off by other teachers were graduating, pursuing their dreams, and becoming advocates for other young people from difficult backgrounds. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received an unexpected piece of mail, a letter from Diana forwarded through Carolyn's address. Michelle. It began. I've been in therapy for 6 months now, working through a lot of issues I never wanted to face. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to try to rebuild a relationship you have every right to reject. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand how much we hurt you, and I'm genuinely sorry. The letter went on to describe Diana's life in a small town in Oregon, where she was working as a waitress and attending community college part-time to study accounting. She'd gotten sober, was in therapy, and had started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped women leaving abusive relationships. I know I can't undo the damage we caused, the letter concluded, but I wanted you to know that what happened to you mattered, that it wasn't your fault, and that you deserved so much better from the people who were supposed to protect you. I hope you found the happiness and love you always deserved. Reading the letter, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, validation, sadness for the family relationships that could have been, and gratitude that Diana was finally getting help. But I also felt something I'd never experienced before: complete emotional detachment from the outcome of her healing process. Her growth was hers to manage. Her amends were for her own recovery, not my responsibility to accept or reject. My life was full of people who'd chosen to love me without having to overcome years of abuse and betrayal first. I showed the letter to Marcus and Dr. Chen, discussing what response, if any, felt appropriate. You don't owe her anything, Dr. Chen reminded me. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even acknowledgement. The only question that matters is what feels authentic to you. In the end, I decided not to respond. Diana's apology was meaningful, but it didn't create an obligation for me to resume contact with someone who'd participated in traumatizing me. True healing sometimes meant accepting that some relationships couldn't be repaired, no matter how sincerely someone apologized for breaking them. The week before our wedding, Marcus and I attended our final premarital counseling session with Dr. Chen. We'd been working together to build communication skills, conflict resolution strategies, and shared goals for our life together. I'm proud of both of you, Dr. Chen said as we wrapped up our final session. Michelle, you've built something beautiful from circumstances that could have destroyed you. Marcus, you've been patient and supportive through a healing process that required tremendous strength. Together, you've created exactly the kind of partnership that breaks generational cycles and creates new patterns of love. On our wedding morning, I woke up in the small apartment I'd been living in since moving out of Carolyn's house, surrounded by the women who'd become my chosen sisters, Carolyn, Dr. Chen, and 3 teaching colleagues who'd supported me through every step of my journey. As they helped me into my wedding dress, a simple but elegant design that made me feel beautiful without being ostentatious, I thought about all the versions of this day I'd imagined as a child. In those fantasies, Patricia would have been helping with my hair, while Diana served as my maid of honor. The reality was infinitely better surrounded by women who loved me for who I was, rather than who they wanted me to be. The ceremony took place in the school garden where I'd found my calling with Marcus, waiting for me beside an arch of flowering vines that symbolized new growth. As Carolyn walked me down the aisle, I saw faces filled with genuine joy and love. Former students who'd become like my own children colleagues, who'd become family and friends who'd chosen to be part of my story. Dr. Chen spoke about the courage it takes to build love from scratch, to choose healing over history, to create families based on mutual care rather than obligation. When Marcus and I exchanged vows, we'd written ourselves promising to support each other's growth, celebrate each other's successes, and face difficulties as partners rather than adversaries. I felt like we were making a commitment, not just to each other, but to every future generation that would benefit from the healthy relationship we were modeling. As we danced our first dance as a married couple surrounded by people who'd proven that love could be gentle, consistent, and safe, I realized that the greatest revenge against those who tried to convince me I was worthless was simply living a life filled with joy and purpose. 6 months later, Marcus and I received news that we were expecting our first child. As I placed my hand on my growing belly, I thought about the child who would grow up in a home filled with love, encouragement, and the security of knowing they were wanted exactly as they were. This baby would never wonder if they were a burden. They would never have to earn love through perfect behavior or accept abuse disguised as family loyalty. They would grow up understanding that families could be chosen, that love was supposed to feel safe, and that their worth was inherent rather than something they had to prove. The cycle of dysfunction that had defined my family for generations would end with me. In its place, we were building something beautiful, a legacy of love that would ripple outward through our children, our students, and everyone whose life we touched. Standing in our nursery painting walls, the soft green of new leaves, I thought about the broken girl who'd been pushed down concrete steps just 2 years ago. She'd had no idea that her greatest trauma would become the catalyst for her greatest transformation, that losing her family of origin would lead her to create something infinitely better. As I painted, Marcus brought me lunch and kissed my forehead with the gentle affection that had become the rhythm of our daily life. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "How grateful I am for that push down those steps," I said honestly. "It hurt terribly at the time, but it saved my life in every way that matters." He smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, not because the trauma was good, but because it forces you to build something entirely new from the wreckage. That evening, as we sat together planning our child's future, I thought about the question I wanted to ask all of you who might be listening to this story. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? Have you ever realized that protecting yourself isn't selfish, but necessary? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about times when setting boundaries changed your life for the better. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through adversity. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in difficult family situations. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to walk away. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish each of you the courage to choose the love you deserve over the dysfunction you inherited. Sometimes the family you create is so much better than the family you came from, and that's not a tragedy. It's a triumph.